I'm quite sure I've shared the story before with you. If not, here's the first time. If not, you've heard it before. It's one of my favorite stories. My wife was backpacking around Europe with one of her friends, and they traveled all around Europe, and they ended up in Italy, and they went to visit the statue of David, Michelangelo's statue at the Academy in Florence. Have you been there before? He was a decent sculptor. I mean, yeah, in Florence, Arizona, yeah, right by the prison. There's a lovely statue of. It's a lovely statue. Yeah, I feel like I could do a better job than that guy, Michelangelo. Like he's an Arizonan. He's a Phoenician. Bear down. She's standing in line. It's a very long line to get in. So she's standing in line, and her friend says to her, "This is a long line. I'm really hungry and thirsty. Why don't you stay in line, and I'll go get us some food and something to drink." She says, "Great." So she's standing there, and she starts to talk to the people around her because it's a very long line. So, if you're in a very long line, you start talking to the people around you, in front of you, and back of you, and the people in front of her start talking to her, and hello, I'm Lisa. The guy says, "I'm Bill," and they start chatting, and turns out Jewish family, really nice connection. Oh my gosh, we live in LA, and then we live in New York a little, but also in LA. And my wife is, I'm from Maryland. They have this great conversation, and so they have these youngish kids. Their kids are probably in their teens, and she says to them, "It's really great you have the means, you're able to take your family around Europe and to have your kids see their textbooks come to life before their very eyes." This is the line that she used. I know it well because you'll hear why it's interesting. And so she has this great conversation, and then sort of what happens in line is this sort of conversation dies down, and then you just end up standing there again, and you're done talking, and her friend shows up with a sandwich and with a beverage, and the person who's in front of her, who she's been talking to, kind of turns around a little bit, and her friend says, oh my God, do you know who you've been talking to?" And she said, "I don't know, this guy Bill over here." She said, "That's Billy Crystal." "You've been talking to Billy Crystal for like 45 minutes. She said, "I have? I had no idea that was Billy Crystal. Are you kidding? Oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed." The end of the story is that when she went home, she told her grandma that she met Billy Crystal, and then her grandma told all of her friends that she met Billy Joel. So, so my question for you, if you put yourself in my wife's shoes, standing there online waiting to see the statue of David in Florence, Italy, what do you think he was thinking? What do you think this guy was thinking? Do you think he was thinking, is she an idiot? Do you think she was thinking, how refreshing, no one's asking me for my autograph, I'm just having a normal conversation with this human being, and no one's crowding me, and she's not asking me? It made sense why he said later that he lived in LA and in New York, and that he had the means to be able to take his kids to Europe, because it was Billy Crystal. And so, what was he thinking? I often wonder that. And so the idea of what was he thinking, I think, matches very well into our Torah portion this week of Vayigash. It is the third of 4 Torah portions at the end of the book of Genesis that talk about the relationship between Joseph and his brothers. And if you follow along with the story, or if you know it, it's a complicated relationship. They don't love each other that much. And so it's really, the portion essentially almost ends. I mean, the story essentially ends here. There's one more portion, but it's more of a wrap-up. It really essentially ends here. If you know the story, I will tell you very, very briefly that they don't get along, that Joseph sort of felt maybe he was better than the rest of them, and so the brothers decide that they want to kill him. So when they're all alone, they decide to murder him, essentially. But one brother, Judah, steps forward and says, "We shouldn't murder our brother. It's probably a bad idea. Karma's bad. Dad will be upset. Dad, Jacob. So it's probably a bad idea." And so Judah says, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. So ultimately, they put him in a pit, and they sort of have lunch, and they come back, and then he's gone. And he ends up being sold to Egypt, right? So he ends up there. If you know the story, fast forward, he does well. In Egypt, he solves some dreams. He interprets particular dreams from the Pharaoh, and Pharaoh makes him the viceroy, essentially, of Egypt. The fun word I get to say on the Bima for these 4 weeks, viceroy, sort of like the vice president, right? So he's like the vice president of Egypt, and he puts him in charge of giving out food, grain, essentially. And so Jacob, because the brothers are just sitting around, and Jacob says, hey, there's a famine here. Go to Egypt, get food, bring it back so we can eat. So Jacob sends the brothers go, and they show up to this guy who's doling out food, who happens to be Joseph. They can't tell that it's him, but he knows that it's them. So now I want you to start thinking about, what was he thinking? What was Joseph thinking? They show up, and he knows it's them, and he sends them on this task. He says, he gets some information, talk to me about your family. Is this everyone? And they say, no, we have a father. Do you have anyone else? And they say, yes, we have a younger brother, which is Benjamin. And so they have this dialogue, and then he says to them, okay, I'll only give you grain if when you come, you have to come back with everyone, meaning come back with the whole family. And so they go back to their father, and they say, listen, Dad, if you want food, this guy in Egypt says we have to all come together. And Jacob says, okay, I'm not going, but you can pretty much take Benjamin, even though I'm nervous. I think that I'm nervous for him. And so Judah actually says, Dad, Benjamin is in my care. I got him. And so they leave, and they come back, and they come back to Egypt to the guy who's doling out the food, which happens to be Joseph again. And this time he tests them. He sort of gives them this cup, and it's stolen. And so ultimately, this is where the Torah portion starts this week, where Joseph finds out that they stole something, and he is angry, knowing full well that he's the one who planted it there. And so he says to them, fine, I'm going to keep this younger one as a hostage. You can all go. And Judah steps forward and says, I can't let that happen. If you are going to take this one, this younger one, this Benjamin, I promise my father I'd take care of him. Take me instead. And so at that moment, Joseph, in the Torah portion, asks, pretty much yells to everyone in the room. And I want you to think about what the room looked like. What do you think the room looked like with the viceroy of Egypt standing in a room or an area doling out food to hundreds of people who are online? Think of the size, the sound, the scope of the room, and he says, everyone out except for these guys, all the guards too. And it's in that moment that he says to them, I'm Joseph. And they're in sheer terror when they realize it's him, that they're standing in front of who they think is the viceroy of Egypt, is actually the brother that they thought maybe they might murder and ultimately get sold into Egypt. So what is Joseph thinking? What's in his head? What is he thinking in this moment? What is it that finally, because the story's been going on for 2 other Torah portions, why is it at this moment he decides, I'm going to reveal who I am to them? What is it? Now, a lot of commentaries come to say that it's actually what Judah does, because Judah comes forward and actually says, you can't take the boy. I promised my dad to keep him. You're going to take me instead. And so maybe it's that moment that Joseph realizes they actually do care for each other. And so that's when he reveals himself. But think of the power he has over them. And by the way, this has been going on for 2 other portions. So particularly last week, he has total control over them. He could have squashed them like bugs, but he doesn't. What is he thinking? And so all throughout the Torah portion, this week, last week, and the week before, and even going into next week, we have to think about what was he thinking. And so here's the second part. He says, the first thing he says to them, I'm Joseph. The second part he says is, how's my father? And so the commentary jumps all over this because, remember, this is their second trip. He already asked them about their father. So the commentary asks, why is he asking again? He knows very well how his father is. Why is he asking again? And it's maybe because Judah steps forward. And so the theory in the commentary is that when he does it the first time, it's the viceroy of Egypt asking the question. In the second time, he's asking, how's dad? How's my dad doing? And so if you follow the line of thinking, what was he thinking? We have to get into the mind of Joseph and try and figure out what power he yields and how he chooses to use it or not use it. And that's, for me, the fascinating part of what Vayigash is about, what this Torah portion is. Was he testing them? Was it this immense power that he had and he chooses to not disclose? What is he thinking? What was Billy Crystal thinking in that moment? What are any of us thinking in moments where we maybe are in power over someone else and we sort of know what the plan is in our heads and they don't know? And what sort of power we yield to take advantage of a situation or not take advantage of a situation and change from the viceroy to, how's dad? How is that transition work for us? How do we find ourselves in these, how come, I'll speak for myself, I find myself in situations where you're either on one end of the power or the other end of the power, and how would it feel to be tricked either way, to be led down this path either way? Because we're not mind readers. We have to trust the relationship we have with someone. And so you have to go on this ride of what was Joseph thinking. And the Torah portion, if you want to read more about it yourselves, or particularly tomorrow morning at 8:45 in Torah study, can maybe bring to light perhaps what he was thinking in this very complicated moment. And so we never know what Joseph, Billy Crystal, your neighbor, your boss, your friend, is thinking. But if we're put in that position, I would hope that we would make the right choice, the trustworthy choice, the choice to transfer ourselves from being the viceroy, being of that stature, and switching to say, how are you? How's dad? Making it a personal moment. And I invite all of us to think about this on this Shabbat as we sort of move into the conclusion of this incredible set of stories, this incredible part of the Torah, and the end of the Torah, because this is the penultimate portion. We end next week. So I invite all of us to think about that. Shabbat Shalom.